Welcome to the Vancouver True Crime podcast. So in this episode, I'm going to discuss Vancouver in the 1990s. I'm going to specifically focus on the cannabis, the BC bud industry, and how it just exploded into a massive economic underground powerhouse. At the height of BC bud, which I believe peaked, I would say even by 1995, all the way about 2015. A pound of marijuana that was quality grown, packed, and shipped, or smuggled, to the USA was worth anywhere from $2,000 to up at its peak at $3,000 a pound. Now, if you had the ability to get that pound of BC bud, this is the primo stuff. It was trading in Miami, Florida, on par with cocaine. So think about this for a moment. You grow a plant, you grow a pound of weed, you smuggle it to Miami, Florida, and you bring it back a kilo of cocaine, and that kilo of cocaine is now worth $30,000. Of course, not everyone had the ability to do this. I saw a lot more disasters than successes in the marijuana grow-up world. But I've seen some true successes too. One of my best friends was a major grower. I'll tell you about his operation. But first, consider this. Not everyone's really smart enough to grow marijuana on a large scale. It's actually a difficult thing to grow. And it requires equipment and it requires investment money to get it off the ground. If you really want to do it properly, you got to find a house. You got to get the equipment. You got to know how to grow the plant. You got to know how to separate the males from the females. You got to know how to cure it properly so it's actually smokable. And then you got to find a buyer. Well, finding a buyer, if it's good, is no big deal. But there was also a lot of gangs and crews that didn't want to go through all that effort. They would just find out where you were growing it and rip you off. So grow rips were a big thing. Plus, you have people that are not that bright putting together electrical work that weren't qualified as electricians, and houses burning down, booby traps, and plus the paranoia of getting busted at any moment because the dumb, obvious grow-ups were just like, they were just like low-hanging fruit for the police. The police looked good in the community for doing a bust, but the real growers, the smart ones, did things a lot more sophisticated. 1990, I graduated from high school. I was going to a high school called Kitsilano, which was almost the opposite of the spectrum from Templeton. Kitsilano was chill. People smoked weed. No one fought. There was no fist fights. It was non-violent. And everyone kind of got along pretty good, even though there was a whole bunch of different types of kids and stuff. No, there was some teasing and stuff, but compared to Templeton, it was a cakewalk. Now, Vancouver in the 1990s was very different than the 80s. The city changed a lot. You had a lot more immigrants now coming into Vancouver. And so you started seeing a rise of ethnic gangs. Not saying all immigrants were joining gangs, but every community has gangsters. The other consideration in the 90s was Vancouver was a pretty depressed city in the early 90s. There was no movie industry yet. There was a few TV shows being filmed. There was 21 Jump Street and Degrassi High, which was filmed at my high school. And but it was the film industry was in its infancy. So there wasn't a lot of work. The city was pretty depressed. Looking for jobs and stuff were pretty brutal. And I actually left Vancouver for about 2 years because it was a pretty depressed time around the early 90s. I went and lived in the States with my dad and traveled around through the States and stuff. I came back in 2002, 2003, and there was a real fundamental to the city. The city was starting to grow. The movie industry was starting to get big. Clubs were coming up. I already started hearing about friends I went to high school with that were doing some pretty successful grow-ups. But one of the biggest things that I noticed was lots of cocaine in the city. And the gangsters were different now. The gangsters like my brother were kind of seen as a joke. Even by myself and my friends, we kind of made fun of him. No longer he was the brash, daring gangster. He was kind of like one-dimensional, almost like a cartoon character to us. And the true gangster now was a little bit more toned down. Of course, you had to be tough and you had to use violence. And the violence did escalate because people didn't care about who was the toughest and who could win a fist fight. Guns were pretty available. So the big thing I saw, and I started working in nightclubs and stuff as a bouncer, is you started having worry about people bringing guns in the club. And I worked at a couple nightclubs that had shootings, which I won't get into in this podcast. I'll get into that one in another podcast. But the level of violence is now escalating. You had gangsters from countries that were war-torn. You know, Vietnamese gangsters, you think they care about some tough guy from East Van who can throw a good right hook? No, they'll shoot the guy. And so there was more violence now. Shootings started to happen. There was a nightclub called the Loft 6. There was a major shooting between the Indo-Canadian gangsters and motorcycle bikers that had a huge shootout. I think 6 people died in it. So clubs were starting to get a little dangerous, and security really started to ramp up and stuff. And they started doing stuff like bar watch and programs like that. So the thing that was important, if you were a true gangster that wanted respect, it was no longer, the tough guy from East Van. That era was now long and gone. You had to have money. You had to have power. You had to actually have to be able to, wield your power and stay out of jail. Because the one thing that the government in BC does have, and they do use it a lot, is forfeit seizure, process of crimes. Property of crimes, earning of crimes, and they can seize all your stuff. And I've known people that has had that happen to. So if you're kind of like the bottom rung gangster where all your money's frozen, well, you're kind of out of commission, right? And now you probably have to go off and do more violent and stupid crimes because, you have nothing to lose. Where the people more higher up on the food chain, it was a cost of doing business, and they had other cash flow reserves going, so they could fight the government and a lot of times win and get their stuff back. So I known a lot of people because they were out of work and they got frustrated, that they decided to go into the marijuana grow business. One case was a friend of mine that. Now in high school, he was a kid that cut grass on the weekends, washed cars, painted houses, and saved all his money. And when he graduated from high school, he went into business. First, he had a painting business. And, painting business in Vancouver can do quite well, but it's seasonal. You do well in the summer, and then you have virtually no work in the wintertime. Especially in a down economic time, it's pretty much, dry as a bone. And then he decided during the wintertime, he was going to take his investment and buy a limousine. So he drove this big, massive limousine, and he was trying to get this limousine business off the ground. And, it was very difficult. He really had to grind and grind and grind. And with, Vancouver at the time, I'm telling you, there was virtually no work. It was a really tough time. And finally, he got frustrated. He started selling cocaine. But he was smart. He wasn't a cocaine user himself. So he was selling cocaine to raise money to do a grow up and do a proper grow up. And when he had enough money, his level of grow up was highly sophisticated. He started off with one house. The house was immaculately kept. He had contractors that he would pay to do proper electrical, the fans, the lighting system, everything. He would put it in an area that was kind of, out in the suburbs, not so noticeable. He would hire crews to come and cut the grass and keep the house clean. And then he hired someone to live at the house. So there was some activity at the house. So it wasn't this dead house that looked suspicious in the neighborhood, because there was always paranoia about grow-ups. And, you start to grow up in a strange neighborhood, neighbors would get pretty paranoid because there's a fire, police raids, grow rips in your neighborhood. Sometimes they would target the wrong house. That has happened. Lunatic psychopaths hear secondhand information about a grow-up and they raid the wrong house. So, they caused a lot of distress in a lot of neighborhoods. So at this time of the BC grow industry, it was estimated there was between 30,000 and 40,000 homes that marijuana was being used to grow in. And to give you kind of perspective, so let's say marijuana is about $2,000 a pound. So a small mom and pop, a guy, who does live and work and stuff and doesn't draw a lot of attention to himself, has a small grow up in his garage. Let's say 8 lights. Now, this 8-light operation could easily give him $15,000, $20,000 extra cash a month. On top, if he's working 9 to 5 and this is a nice little cash gig, pretty good money. So majority of these grow-ups were mom and pops. The smart ones were low-key, didn't get busted. I know people that grew for 20 years and didn't get busted because they were smart. They didn't tell everybody about it. They didn't flash their cash. I knew idiots that would maybe get 1 or 2 grows, and next thing you know, they're at the bar and gold chains and, flashing cash and telling the whole world that they have grown marijuana. And the funny thing about those guys is usually how they got busted was ex-girlfriends. So now they were all flushed with cash. They dumped the old girlfriend and better dealed her for a new, sexier model, so usually with boob implants. The old girlfriend would feel burned and drop a dime and snitch them out, and they would get busted. And most of them didn't recover from it. But focusing now on the more sophisticated grower, I'm going to talk about my friend who I'm going to call Benny. So he first started dealing cocaine, and it was a very lucrative trade in Vancouver. There was a huge cocaine market, and then because there was so much cocaine in the city, the price dropped down. So then more people did cocaine, and a lot of people, especially because I worked at clubs, there was a lot of people that were weekend recreational users from all walks of life. I caught every type of professional doing coke in the can when I was a bouncer, from lawyers, doctors, nurses, school teachers. It became a thing for a while. When you have a night out, you get your flap of blow. It was pretty common at that time. So this was another massive cash cow, because obviously the profits locally, if you're selling weed locally, it doesn't make a lot of money. I'm talking about if you're a weed dealer in Vancouver. There was a lot of weed in the city. It was kind of a flooded market for marijuana. Most people sold marijuana. They used it almost as a marketing or a loss leader, the term they use in marketing, to sell their other products, ecstasy and cocaine and other things. Special K was a big thing, remember, back then. People were doing GHB even back then. And around the mid-90s, I started seeing meth and speed and that kind of stuff coming into clubs too. And a lot of people, as I said, hey, you want to buy some weed is easier than saying, hey, do you want to buy meth, coke, or pills, right? So anyways, so Ben, being a very straight-laced guy, didn't use drugs, didn't smoke weed, drank a little bit, and had a business head on him. So he got his first house, and then he got, I think at his peak, he had 6 houses altogether. He would rotate them so he'd have a crop each month, and he grew anywhere between 50 to 100 pounds of weed, times that by $2,000. So just underestimating, say he was doing about 50 pounds a month, never got busted. He was netting easily, conservatively, 100 G's a month. But what he did with the profits is that he invested in more cocaine and started being like a major mover of cocaine, like up on the top of the pyramid. And then I'm going to fast forward because I kind of lost touch with him. And the last I heard was his girlfriend took one of his machine guns and shot herself, used his machine gun. I think I heard it was like a Tech 9 machine 9mm pistol machine gun, and use it to shoot herself in the head. And then his business partner that he was dealing with was found with his hands cut off and Ben had to flee the country. So I have no idea where he is, and I hope he's doing well because he's a nice guy, but I think he got in way and over his head. So this is the cycle, is what I mean, is you have someone who probably in a good economic time would have probably been happy just being a legitimate business person, but due to frustration and stuff, the lure of easy cash and seeing a lot of people making a lot of money that were struggling, just like you were, now living the high life. So with all this influx of cash in BC, all these clubs started opening up, restaurants, strip bars. The Vancouver used to be known as Sin City of the North. It had the most strip bars per capita than anywhere in North America, other than Las Vegas, of course, or somewhere like that. But for Vancouver, there was a strip bar in almost every neighborhood. Even upper class neighborhoods, there was strip bars too, like on Marine Drive, the Fraser Arms, and you can go on and on. It was a different city. That really kind of started in the middle 80s, but kind of peaked up into the late 90s. The strip industry. So you had the guys that would go and flash and spend a lot of cash, right? So you had a lot of money, and now you also had legitimate people using money laundering. Houses were being built specifically for growers. So you had mortgage brokers, you had real estate agents, you had lawyers, you had tradesmen. It became a major industry on the higher end of the industry. It became a $7 billion a year industry. And a lot of that also created other types of crimes because people were investing money into more white collar crimes, stock frauds, things like that was a huge issue in the 90s in Vancouver. Lots of stock scam. Vancouver Stock Exchange doesn't exist anymore. It's now called the Toronto Venture Exchange. They had to get rid of the Vancouver name because it was the scam stock market of North America. I knew lawyers that would make paper companies and then put them up on the stock exchange, pump them up to a certain price, and then the company would just disappear, money gone. Or you could get some alcoholic geologist to go out in the field and to declare a piece of dirt as mineral rich. And then you raise a whole bunch of money on that, and we're going to mine the gold, the oil, the diamonds, you name it. The whole thing's a scam. So the Vancouver Stock Exchange was rife with that. And I'm not saying that's directly tied to the marijuana grow industry, but I feel that all this excessive money created an atmosphere of people trying to make fast money from a variety of things. It became a culture of almost acceptance, almost, right? The police were trying their best in some regards, but it was in way over their head. But the most major thing that it did, it literally gave criminal organizations millions and millions of dollars, which attracted more criminal organizations because the court was not equipped to deal with this level of criminality. So the BC economy and the BC Bud, the two almost became entrenched together. I have another friend who was a grower probably up to about he started in the 90s and he finished in about 2015-ish. He retired as a millionaire. And he was even with a bigger, more sophisticated crew than my friend Benny was. And he took me to one of the grow-ups and it blew my mind. It was in a rural area, which I won't tell you. And what they would do is they'd find like a piece of farm property that was very well hidden. And they would build a house up front, up on the road. So if neighbors went by, they saw a house and people living in a house, so they didn't suspect anything. And then in the barn that was refurbished to become a major grow up, apparently the air conditioning system was worth $100,000. So this was a major, major, major grow up, and they didn't get busted. They use very sophisticated things, and they had very sophisticated ways of smuggling into the States, which I won't tell you because I probably could identify who they were, because it would be kind of a giveaway. So anyways, they had, in this circumstance, they were growing probably about 1,000 pounds a month. And they had more than one of these big, massive, industrial size grow ups. And they didn't get busted. And it almost to the point where I asked them not to take me there anymore, because I just felt like whoever like the real high up person that was in charge of it. I didn't want them to know that I knew where their grow up was, so just leave it at that. But I'd say the majority though of growers in BC were probably in the middle, and they were every walk of life, like every walk of life. So again, this was a major cash crop for people. Hockey moms were growing weed, to fund their kids' hockey career. Like it was that much of a thing. I knew a family, and this is a family I grew up with, even going back to East Vancouver. And I went to kindergarten with one of the daughters, so I was really close. I knew this family well, like very well. And the father was in the same situation. He had a business where he worked in installing air conditioning and air ventilation systems. And something else happened in the early 90s that had a very devastating effect on the construction trade. So this is one of the other reasons why there wasn't a lot of jobs around that time frame. There was called the leaky condos. So all these developers thought it was a great idea in wet, rainy Vancouver to build California and Mediterranean style of apartments and condos in rainy Vancouver that has some of the highest rainfall anywhere in North America. So they leaked. They had mildew and mold, and it was a complete disaster, So this family, the father, was heavily affected by this, and his business basically he was out of work. He was out of work, and he had no money, no way to feed the family or anything like that. So he decided, and he actually had a family meeting, to grow marijuana as a family. And with his construction skills and things like that, he built and ran a very sophisticated grow up that never got busted, and they had buyers. He had a big Suburban, and they would drive it across country to places like Toronto and Montreal where they had buyers already lined up, and he would do these drives every couple of months, and they were apparently worth anywhere from 90 to up in the 100,000 range. So again, you have a family and person struggling to feed their family, trying to do a construction trade, which got absolutely devastated through economic factors. And now he's a millionaire. And now when you think other people see that, the people that know them, everybody wants in on it. It's like it became almost like a little gold rush mentality. Because like I said, Vancouver, boom and bust. And when you've been starving and all of a sudden you've been invited to a buffet, you're going to eat more and you're going to keep wanting that food coming. So that was the environment that created that, and had, of course, all the spin-off effects of violent gangs, giving them the ability to buy guns. Guns were very available. In the 80s, it was impossible to buy a gun. You might be able to buy maybe a shotgun or a rifle. Handguns were very difficult. But if you were kind of connected, a few phone calls, I could buy a handgun ranging from $500 to $1,000, depending on the make, model, and things like that. So guns became very available. So, again, it changed the environment of the city. So one thing I want to talk about is how is marijuana smuggled or was smuggled in the States. So all the methods that I knew about was, first of all, easiest one, driving across the border. That of course got tougher, but in the beginning, people were hiring old mom and pops, old grandpa and grandma that drove down being snowbirds to Arizona and places like that for the wintertime to fill up their RV with marijuana. So there was that. There was trucking companies, obviously, planes that would fly low and go to private airstrips, helicopters that would pop across the border on flying low again, tunnels. The dragging method, this method goes back to Prohibition, because back in the 20s and 30s, Vancouver was a boom town because of Prohibition. Most of the big mansions in the Shaughnessy area, which is one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Vancouver, was built on rum running. Again, so marijuana was the big Prohibition cash cow than what alcohol prohibition was in the 20s and 30s. So the method is that you use a boat, a sailboat, whatever kind of boat, and then you drag it way behind you on a long line. So if Coast Guard, someone comes, you just cut the line. They can search your boat, nothing's on it. So the dragging method was a common one. Hiking, the border's massive. So there's areas where people can just literally put marijuana in a backpack and hike across the border. Train compartments. That I was told from a very good source that Rail workers would have special train cars with welded secret compartments that would just go across the border. But of course, you had to pay for a premium for that. That was only open to the really big, time people. Another consideration, the private prison system in the United States became more of a thing, and more people who use marijuana was targeted to fill up that prison system. I looked at a statistic of 2005, close to 800,000 marijuana arrests in the United States for people using personal amounts of marijuana to, I guess, having like pounds of it, or growers that got tangled up in the American justice system. And, so there's that side of the argument too. So again, this plant that should have just been regulated like tobacco, and in the early days, it was seen as a medicinal, plant for remedies for stomach upset, or, even way back then, cramps. It was seen as a medicine. So it became a cash cow for a lot of people, including the justice system, people having to hire lawyers to defend themselves, So yeah, BC Bud, $7 billion a year. A lot of people got rich off it. Some people it destroyed. The family that I was telling you about, the daughter ended up dying from drug overdose because she started getting that party lifestyle, and she had addiction issues, and she ended up passing away. So again, think back. Imagine if you were going to do a course of action that created a chain of events that, your girlfriend ends up committing suicide with one of your machine guns, and your partner found his hands chopped off, or your daughter ends up dying of hard drug overdose because she has an abundance of money and no self-control. So yeah, BC Bud, the gateway drug. It shouldn't have happened this way. Should have been regulated like tobacco. I myself have used cannabis to quit drinking alcohol. I used to binge drink. And, it was bad because I would go through long periods of time not drinking, and then I would binge drink, and then it would really, be a disaster. So I use marijuana to stop drinking. So I haven't drank in 5 years. So I use cannabis to heal myself. I think it could be a very healing medicine if it's done right and properly and grown properly, organically, without being sprayed or, anything laced with it. The plant itself has a lot of benefits and remedies. It's just too bad the powers that be kept it away from us, and they allowed criminals to get really rich and really powerful. So, yeah, it's a shame. In my next podcast, I'm going to discuss gangs, the rise and power of the gang environment in BC going now from the 2000s to current day. And then I'm going to do one more podcast called Is Vancouver Dying? The economic situation that I'm seeing. Lots of for lease signs. All my favorite places going out of business. There used to be this really amazing clothing store, Leonie's, which I really love buying stuff. You want to buy something really nice and special. It used to be my go-to place. It's shutting down. All my favorite restaurants are seen to be boarding up. And it's not the same city that it was, 10, 15 years ago. It's a real shame. So that's the podcast I have in the next coming episodes. Next week, I am going to go back to the missing murdered women. I'm working with some people who know family members of missing murdered women of the Indigenous community. So I really want to take my time, do some really great research. I have some great sources that I'm going to be talking to off the record to get a real behind the scenes of what's going on. In some of these cases, I'm not going to be able to say certain details because it might actually disrupt or ruin an investigation. So I have to be careful and considerate, but it's a story that needs to be told, and I can't emphasize that enough. So these women really need more attention because it's beyond monstrous what happened to them. So again, 2 more podcasts on Vancouver. Then next week, I'm going to really, really dig deep into missing murdered women. We're going to also look in the downtown east side of the missing murdered women. The Robert Pickton case, really explore that. There's also 5 women that went missing in the Vernon area. I'm going to talk about that case, some highway of tier cases. And also I'm in the process of building a WordPress site that's going to be my repository and my archive for all my source material. And I'm working on that as I speak. So I really appreciate your listening, your support, and all the positive comments, ratings that I get. Thank you so much. It means the world to me. You all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Who's profiting off of it? Is there really $7 billion floating around the province unaccounted for? Maybe people are feeling the effects and they don't even know it. Turns out there seems to be a system. Some have even given this system a name.
Well, a lot of people here in town and stuff consider it a union, right?
Union?
Yeah, union, and it's like a different, it's a different term for pretty much industry.
It's this underground thing where there's so many different tradesmen and different people all working together.
You have to work together with people that you trust because it's illegal to do what people are doing here.
So this is how the so-called union breaks down. And of course, there are many exceptions to this, but this is the typical setup. First, you have a home or landowner. He doesn't take on much responsibility. He is simply the legitimate owner of where the grow operation will take place. All he has to do is pick up a briefcase every 3 months and pay off his mortgage. His hands are clean because he can claim ignorance if the grow operation is busted. Oh, I'm sorry, officer. I didn't know they were growing marijuana there. Then you have his 50-50 partner, the contractor, who will provide the equipment and hire the grower or grow himself. The grower is known as the fall guy. Why the name? Because that's exactly what he is. If the operation is busted, he takes the fall. Once the crop is matured, clippers are then hired. They prep the weed for distribution by cutting away the excess leaves and stems. What a lot of people don't understand is a part of the marijuana plant that people smoke is the bud, which in essence is the plant's flower. It's not the leaves. Clippers are generally hired on an hourly wage starting around $20. Tax-free, of course. Once the marijuana is ready, in steps the weed broker. He's not always required, but sometimes the partner with the equipment needs a broker to buy his product and then sell it for him. In the event that a broker is required, it usually means the weed is headed south to the United States. In that case, the broker will buy the pot for somewhere between $1,800 and $2,000 a pound. He'll then hire a border jumper, a risk taker, someone who has the balls and hopefully the wits to get the product over the border. Some of the most common ways? The border jumper's fee varies with each trip, but they're always well paid. Once the product has reached the broker's U.S. connection, it will earn about $3,000 a pound. The farther south it goes, the more it makes. If it manages to make it all the way out east to areas like New York, the price is driven even higher, somewhere between $3,500 and $6,000 a pound. Stricter laws demand higher prices and in turn provide more profits. In Miami, 7 to 8 pounds of BC bud will trade for 1 kilo of pure yayo. Cocaine. That in turn makes its way back up to Canada. And sells for anywhere from $30,000 to $35,000 a key. If the marijuana manages to stay in the province, it will usually sell for around $1,800 to $2,000 a pound, depending on how flooded the market is. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The union embodies a slew of businesses and services, generating profits both directly and indirectly for the province. Some know they are involved and others choose not to acknowledge the benefits they gain from it. Carpenters build tables, rooms, sheds, and anything else that's needed for a grow show.
Brand new homes are being built expressly for the purpose of housing a marijuana grow operation.
Electricians set up lights, wire the electrical components, divert power if necessary. Hardware stores provide construction materials to build rooms and grow operation structures. Hydroponic stores supply lights, nutrients, soil, and other equipment needed to grow. Seed sellers provide, seeds. Clone growers create clones from other marijuana plants to aid in quicker grow cycles. Real estate agencies market houses to growers, unknowingly, but they profit all the same. There are some realtors, though, who are directly involved in the union and will actually cater to growers' needs, finding houses in secluded areas with big basements and power that can be spliced and stolen. Mortgage brokers and lease brokers who help growers with poor credit get the houses they need to start up. Banks who have minimal security to prevent illegal money from being deposited. The way it works now is deposits over $3,000 are sometimes questioned but are left up to the teller to decide whether the deposit is suspicious. If they believe it is, They may put a note on the account. It isn't until a $10,000 deposit that a mandatory FCAC form is filled out and sent away. But it is possible for $9,999 deposits to go through with little question. Oh, you sold some motorbikes. Cool. Oh, you sold your boat. Neat. Thanks for the business. You get the point. Lawyers and law firms who provide counseling on how to make grow money legit. They help set up and incorporate LTD companies and holding companies to launder money. They also provide legal counsel to keep busted growers out of jail. The electric company who makes money off of enlarged electric bills due to excess lights. The only time they seem to get involved is when they think someone is stealing the power. Law enforcement receives budgets to fight the cultivation. They create special task forces like the Green Team to specifically target marijuana. Canadians spend $300 to $500 million annually on law enforcement and the justice system to enforce marijuana laws. Police also receive the benefits of seizing growers' and dealers' assets. And last, but definitely not least, everyday businesses. Bars, restaurants, clothing stores, boat dealerships, car dealerships. The money funneled indirectly through various everyday businesses. Growers and dealers like to spend money on everything.
These growers, after they crop out, it's like they won the lottery.
You can tell the ones who are selling it. The more they sell, the more bling bling they have on them.
Do you think they just hold it themselves and tuck it away somewhere? No, they buy houses, they buy cars, they buy boats.
They'll purchase restaurants, they'll purchase, whatever they're into.
Maybe that's why we got busted. We got too carried away.
You can tell yourself you're not going to let it go to your head, but I said the same thing. But when the money comes in so easy, you get accustomed to that lifestyle, and before you know it, you become a steamer, you become a hot rod.
And that's what it comes down to. Yes, organized crime moves a majority of the product once it's available on the market. But there aren't a lot of bikers out there watering plants. It's mom and pop operations, it's young guys who see opportunity.
It's not easy to make that type of money doing anything, especially if you've been going to school for, the past 4 years and you see this random other guy, watering plants in his basement coming out of it with an extreme amount of money.
I understand, you have your degree.
Yeah.
And then you're in the...
Yeah, I made the choice to put that aside and start growing weed. I could be making $33 an hour, which is a great wage, but really, why would I want to do that when I have the knowledge to make in a whole year in 2 months?
What have we learned so far? Well, one, the prohibition hasn't reduced the demand, and it certainly hasn't reduced the supply. Two, it's a steady source of revenue for organized crime, which in turn attracts young people because the money is so easy. And three, being an underground market actually creates crime and violence. And yet, the only one paying the costs for all of this are the taxpayers, people like you and me. Even further, this whole deal is over a drug that seems to pose no more of a threat than the substances we already regulate. At the very least, why isn't this up for debate?
Dwight Eisenhower once spoke of a military-industrial complex. Have we built up a marijuana prohibition complex?
The real war on marijuana didn't start until 1972. And President Nixon said, it's all the Jews smoking pot. And he really said that.
When Nixon got into this with his war on drugs, he had things that he wanted to do. He had an agenda.
A lot of the information that was kept and warehoused in the Library of Congress and also at major universities was actually recalled and destroyed. The Nixon report that came out through his administration, it was called the Schaefer Report. It was by a Republican governor, and when he studied it and gave an answer, you can pick this report up, pick up any page, open it, and if you actually have experience with cannabis, you'll realize they're telling the truth.
And then when it came back saying that marijuana was essentially harmless, he totally ignored it, so we're going to launch a war on drugs anyways.
Didn't even print as many copies that Congress and the House would have been able to see.
1970, beginning of the war on drugs. 76 New Jersey troopers became detectives. I was one of them. They designated 1/3 of us as undercover. I happened to fall in that 1/3. That's where I spent the next 14 years of my life. What we were targeted on was the pot smokers. There was a very good reason we were targeted on pot smokers. Most of them were protesting against the Vietnam War. Now, if you could arrest that whole group of people because they were smoking pot, you didn't have to have a Vietnam War protest, which Mr. Nixon thought was a pretty good idea.
So when President Nixon declared the civil war that we're living in right now, the drug war, in 1972, it was really a war on marijuana.
It really didn't kick in until the 80s when Reagan, took over his presidency of the U.S.
Ronald Reagan, he said, these young people, they get together, they read books, they smoke marijuana, and they talk. Like these three elements were a recipe for disaster.
How do I feel about legalizing marijuana? Am I for it or against it? I am totally against legalizing marijuana.